Welcome to the PDB Situation Report. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. First up, the U.S. turns up the pressure on Iran, expanding its blockade and going after the regime's economic lifeline. That, of course, would be oil. We'll be joined by Ambassador Robert Joseph to explain what this means and whether it might change Iran's calculus. Later in the show, after years of sanctions and war, new signs of strain are emerging inside Russia, from a slowing economy to growing frustration over government crackdowns. We'll be joined by Konstantin Samoilov, a Russian expat and host of the popular Inside Russia YouTube channel. Just mosey on over to YouTube and find it at Inside Russia. He'll be breaking down what's happening inside the country. But first, today's Situation Report Spotlight. The U.S. is tightening the screws on Iran, expanding its naval blockade this week to allow forces to stop, search, and even seize vessels tied to Tehran's oil trade worldwide. Now, the goal is clear: cut off the regime's economic lifeline and force a decision. Come back to the negotiating table in good faith, or continue to face mounting pressure. But with talks seemingly stalled and Iran signaling that it will not back down easily, the question now is whether this strategy brings leverage or more escalation. For more on this, I want to bring in Ambassador Robert Joseph, former U.S. Special Envoy for Nuclear Nonproliferation and a key architect of U.S. counterproliferation strategy at the State Department. Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us here on the Situation Report.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I guess we have all sorts of ways we can take this conversation because there is so much happening and it seems to be changing hourly. But if you could give us your perspective on where we are currently with this conflict with Iran. I know that's a very broad playing surface, but just take it wherever you'd like to.
Well, President Trump has been very optimistic in his statements lately that the conflict is coming to a conclusion. The military objectives have clearly been achieved, thanks, of course, to the men and women in uniform, and I think we all owe them a tremendous gratitude for the sacrifices that they've made. The military objectives included, those that have been achieved, included the elimination of the Air Force, the elimination of the Iranian Navy, the elimination or decimation of its army, the attacks on the IRGC, which I think is probably more important than on the conventional military, and on the Basij. The Basij, of course, being the localized forces that are in many ways responsible for the deaths of over 30,000 Iranian protesters in January. The defense industrial base has been decimated. The leadership has been decimated. The principal links to Iran's terrorist proxies have been severed. And now we're in a situation where we're executing I believe, what will be a very effective naval blockade, which will put enormous pressure on the Iranian regime. Yet, the political objectives are still outstanding. First and foremost, of course, is denying Iran the capability to have a nuclear weapon. Now, I understand that there's breaking news, as in the last 10 minutes, that the Iranians have agreed not to have a nuclear weapon, which they've always said in the past, but they've agreed in this case to give up the 60% enriched uranium, enough for 11 nuclear weapons. And at 60%, it's only a few steps away from weapons-grade fissile material. The key that I haven't heard anything recently in this recent announcement is about enrichment and whether or not the Iranians will forego enrichment and that we will ensure that they can't enrich. And I think that's a key element in any agreement. Because having a nuclear weapon has been and continues to be, in my view, in the DNA of this regime. And again, as I said, the president has made this the first and foremost. And also opening the Strait of Hormuz.
But how?
Very.
I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to jump in on that point, that there's been talk, right, from the White House that when you say that it's always been, a stated objective of this regime, or it's been their mindset, it's been in their DNA. The narrative coming from the White House has been, well, we're dealing with a brand new day, a brand new regime, right? It's still the Islamic Republic. We've got a lot of new faces, to be sure. But what is your assessment of that narrative? Is it, in fact, a new government, or is it the same, just different faces? And then there's a second part to this question. Your assessment of past efforts to have verification that they are sticking to any agreement. So if they're saying, okay, we're not going to have a weapon, how do we trust that, given their track record, do you think?
Right. Well, certainly the top-tier leadership has been eliminated, and I think we're dealing with the third string. What I'm reading in the media is that the third string is even more determined in terms of the agenda of the Islamic Republic, promoting the agenda of the Islamic Republic. They're even more conservative. They're even more far to the right than the previous leadership. I don't buy that at all, because I think that this is just the remnants of the regime. My view is that you're not going to have a permanent solution until you have a true regime change. That regime change has to come from the people of Iran. And the people have risen up. They rose up in January. As I said, there were over 30,000 protesters that were killed. And they will, I think, in time, hopefully sooner rather than later, rise up again and take down this regime. In terms of trusting the remnants of this regime when they say that they're not going to have a nuclear weapon, well, I think, like their predecessors, if their lips are moving, they're lying. And you can't trust them, because they've violated every agreement on the nuclear front that they've signed, whether it's the NPT, whether it's the IAEA safeguards, whether it's the Obama JCPOA, all agreements have been violated. And I would think that unless we do have a total cessation of enrichment and the removal of centrifuges, the removal of the infrastructure that allows enrichment, and we have, of course, the ability to go in, take out the fissile material that I mentioned, the 60% enriched uranium. Now that at least buys us time. And I think that's important, because I think we need to buy time for the Iranian people to rise up. Remember, the regime, I guess, still has the guns.
Exactly. I'm glad you just mentioned that, because I was going to point out that it's a pretty strong incentive to stay in your homes if you've just watched tens of thousands of your own citizens be killed by their government. So if you're thinking, okay, we are hoping for that day, and we've been hoping for that day for decades, right? And when it comes to Iran, that the people would eventually be able to take back their government. But are you concerned at all that what we're seeing is an eagerness by the White House to have a deal, any deal, and so that they may say, fine, we're going to cut a deal that says you won't have a nuclear weapon, and to your points you've just made, despite their track record, we're going to be willing to say, oh, look, we've got a deal?
Well, I think President Trump deserves a lot of credit. Remember, this was triggered, we are told, by intelligence that suggested that Iran was only a couple of weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And if that's the case, the president made exactly the right decision. The president also deserves credit, I think, for supporting the people. He's the first president to do that. Remember, Obama and Biden, they sat on their hands. They wanted to negotiate another JCPOA with this with the regime, and the president has undertaken, again, through our military strikes, a significant weakening of the regime. And so I think the regime is ripe for overthrow. Now, yes, we have been waiting for the people to rise up for some years now, and they have risen up time and time again, only to be beaten down. But the January protests, the demonstrations, they were different than the ones before. They weren't motivated by concern over the regime manipulating the votes, in a presidential election. They weren't manipulated, or they weren't directly associated with economic issues, the raise in subsidy, or taking away subsidies for key foods or for energy. The January protests were motivated by ending the regime. It was a key difference. And I think, according to what we hear in terms of surveys, over 80% of the Iranian population want an end to this regime. Understandably, this is a brutal regime. Just think about the number of executions that they've undertaken. Even last year, over 1,600, and they're on an execution spree right now, trying to get rid of all of their internal resistance. This is a brutal regime. It's also a corrupt regime. Okay, they've stolen. They have stolen the goods. They have stolen the natural goods of Iran.
Yeah, the IRGC has its fingers in everything to the benefit of IRGC leaders. I guess the conundrum that I'm thinking of here is that if you get a deal, just let's imagine that again, domestic U.S. and political pressure, has the White House thinking we have to cut a deal here. We've got the midterms looming. We know this is unpopular with the population, so let's get a deal. They cut a deal which basically says, sure, the Iranian regime as it exists now, agrees to give up weapons. I guess it all comes down to the details, is what I'm thinking. If you get 100% transparency and full verification and access, then perhaps. But then what you've done at the same time is you've left in place the same regime, again, admittedly with different faces, but it's still the Islamic Republic, and it continues to be no reason for the people to have any potential hope. Right? So I don't want to sound really negative. I know I am, but sir, if you'll stay right where you are, I want to kind of throw that back at you in the next segment, but we do have to take a quick break. We'll be back with more from Ambassador Joseph here on the Situation Report, so you know what I'm going to say next. I'm going to say, stick around. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, here's the hard truth. Sorry to deliver it. We're all getting older. And look, getting older can hit dudes hard, right? I know that. With me, once I got into my 40s, which seems like just yesterday, it seemed like I was hitting a wall. Same workout, same diet, but, well, everything just got harder. You know what I'm talking about. Recovery slowed, energy dipped. It was all very frustrating. The reality is, look, most men lose about 1% of testosterone yearly after the age of 30, and that's just the way life works. Mars Men, though, helps free that usable testosterone with 8 natural, clinically dosed ingredients, no synthetics, no needles, and here's the thing. Since starting up with Mars Men, my strength, my recovery times, and my steady daily energy have all improved. Now, for a limited time, our listeners get 50% off. That's 50% off for life, plus free shipping and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. Again, that's mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts when you check out. And after you purchase, well, they'll ask where you heard about them. Do me a favor if you could. Tell them the PDB sent you. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Joining me once again is Ambassador Robert Joseph. We're talking about the current situation in Iran. Sir, could you give me your insight, your experience based on many years in this area of to what degree did we have anything resembling transparency on the Iranian nuclear program? And to the people that say, well, President Trump has created this mess, he never should have pulled out of the JCPOA, everything was just fine. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I should say that I do share your concern that we could end up with an agreement that allows this regime to reconstitute itself over time. And I think in that case, we are likely worse off than we were at the beginning, because one of the lessons for this regime is if they have a nuclear weapon, they're not likely to suffer another epic fury. And just look at North Korea. No one's even thinking about attacking North Korea. And that is one of the lessons learned, which makes it even more important that if there is an agreement, we have the type of transparency, we have the type of verification that you're talking about. In the past, we did have IAEA inspectors in Iran at the declared facilities. And Iran would always, of course, play the game of not cooperating fully, especially, and I think this is interesting, especially on those issues associated with weaponization. I mean, you can go back to a report that the IAEA did in 2011, November 2011, in which they outlined those issues that were related to militarization, that is weaponization. And Iran has stonewalled the IAEA on those issues for 14 years. There's just no question in my mind that Iran has made very significant progress on weaponization. And what they need is the fissile material. And if we allow any enrichment, which I think was the principal mistake that was made years ago, if we allow any enrichment, they will achieve a nuclear weapon.
Now, this may surprise you, Mr. Ambassador, but I am not a nuclear scientist. I know I look like one, but can you explain for people who say, well, what is the big deal? If they've enriched, and everyone seems to be on the same page here, that they've enriched up to 60% purity, are there civilian or peaceful uses for uranium enriched to that percentage?
Well, none that would be relevant to Iran. Our submarines, our nuclear-powered submarines, use a fuel that is enriched beyond 60%. Iran doesn't have any nuclear-powered submarines. I should also say that I am not a nuclear physicist. I took two classes in physics when I was an undergraduate, Physics 101 and Physics 101. So that ought to tell you.
I tell you that makes you an expert, though, in my mind. So people right now are like tuning in. I thought I was going to be watching. Yeah, I thought they were watching Ambassador Joseph, the science guy. Well, but again, I think it's a very relevant point because people have tended to want to certainly people who are opposed to this conflict or don't see the national security reasoning behind engaging in this operation, they tend to point to, a few things saying, well, we had the JCPOA, Trump screwed that up, in their minds. And what was the imminent threat? Who cares if they're at 60%? There's certain arguments that they get tossed out, and I think it's all coming from sort of a point of I don't want to say ignorance, but most of us are not nuclear physicists. So I think it behooves us to talk about it and understand it better than we do.
Absolutely. And Trump did the right thing in his first term by abrogating the JCPOA, by pulling out of the agreement. It was a fatally flawed agreement in many respects. And Iran continued to advance its enrichment program, both in terms of the number of centrifuges that were running, as well as the design of those centrifuges. And they went from one generation to the next generation, meaning that they could process more enriched uranium at higher levels faster and faster. They were on the track to be able to do whatever they wanted to in enrichment under the JCPOA. And remember, the JCPOA resulted in us paying the Iranians hundreds of millions of dollars that were just flowing in, as well as billions of dollars in resources that accrued to them through the relief of sanctions and other things. And what did they do with that money? Well, they built their ballistic missile force. They supplied their terrorist proxies in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen, and conducted terrorist activities around the world. I mean, and they, of course, invested a great deal in repressing their own people. I mean, that's what we paid for. That's what appeasement produced. And I think, again, Trump did the right thing then, and as he did most recently. The key is, will he finish the job? And that's what's open-ended at this point.
How do you define that, finishing the job?
Well, I think in the near term, it's if you're going to have an agreement with them, to have an agreement that provides verification, provides monitoring, etc., but that takes out of country the enriched uranium, and it takes out of country the ability to enrich at whatever level. I think that's absolutely essential. And we also, of course, have to focus on the Strait, because I think another lesson that the Iranian regime has learned is that they can put a great deal of pressure on the international economic system by closing the Straits, simply by threatening to destroy maritime vessels coming through the Strait. And we've got to be able to deny them that capability. And it can't be just.
They seem to be doubling down on that idea. They've now announced that they'll be expanding the blockade. So it's not just about ships traveling to or from Iranian ports. They're basically, the U.S. military is saying we can search and seize anywhere in the world for any ship
in the world
that appears to be in support of Iran.
Right.
But
and
again,
that's exactly the right move.
And I agree with you 100%, because I think the only way, perhaps, I could be completely wrong on this, but the only way to get the people to the point where they're courageous enough again to go out on the streets is if they see this continued effort against the regime as it exists currently. I don't think anybody in Iran, any civilian, any citizen in Iran is thinking, well, look at that. We got a brand new regime. You know, it's a brand new day. How about that? I don't think any of them are thinking that. I think they're thinking we still have the same repressive government. We just have to now memorize the names of these new folks that are in charge. And so the concern
it's more
is
repressive.
Yes, and it's more repressive because, by all counts, the IRGC is kind of climbed to the top of the food chain there.
And as I said, they're on an execution spree.
Yes. Yeah, and also, we've been picking up reporting that they've been increasing the number of arrests around the country in a variety of provinces, not just in Tehran, of activists, dissidents, really anybody who they think could cause them a problem. And once they're arrested, of course, is the idea that there's due process. Forget that. But I guess the concern, I keep going back to this same idea because I am conflicted. Everybody wants peace. Everybody wants a solution. But if your solution has just been simply to kick the can a little bit further down the road than previous administrations have, to your point earlier in our conversation, we may be worse off.
I think that's the risk, and that's why the president needs to hold firm. But as you point out, there are countervailing pressures in terms of the price of gas at the pump, in terms of the midterms, the impending midterms. I mean, Trump knows that if the Republicans lose even one of the two houses, it's going to be nothing but investigations all over again. Everything is up, and it's going to, in effect, end the Trump administration, at least its ability to affect true and significant policy in the United States and around the world.
Yeah. In your experience, I mean, is this? I mean, you can get pretty cynical, I guess, about the kind of the dysfunctional nature of politics sometimes in the States. But I mean, this is a major geopolitical issue, right? We're talking about Iran. We're talking about the Middle East, the stability of the region, the future growth and opportunity for the region. The Gulf states would certainly not be sad to see this regime go. But in your experience over all the years, is it typical or atypical for domestic political pressure? This is probably a stupid question. For domestic political pressure in the U.S. to drive serious, important, major geopolitical issues?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and I think we've seen it over and over again, and we're certainly seeing it now. The key is, does the president have the strength, the internal strength, to stand up to those pressures and to do the right thing? Because, as I say, if not, we could be worse off than before. And again, my hat's off to the president for doing the right thing up till today. But if this agreement is similar to the ones that previous presidents have negotiated, we're in deep trouble because of the lessons that have been learned by the remnants of this regime.
Well, indications are that, I mean, the latest early talks out of Pakistan and from some of the reporting out of there was that, they were already jostling over the idea of, well, how long do you restrict enrichment? Is it 20 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 7 years? Which, by definition, you're putting in a sunset clause, which was one of the, concerns over the JCPOA. I feel like I've spent decades being cynical about this situation with Iran. I've got some wonderful friends, Iranian friends, and they just deserve better. I had a good friend who was one of the hostages when the revolution kicked off, and it just, if you've been watching this thing for any period of time, sir, you have a hard time being optimistic.
Right. I would say that the regime has demonstrated a very effective capability for negotiate. They know how to negotiate, and they play for time, and they win. They won over and over and over on the nuclear issue until now. And the JCPOA is Exhibit A in terms of an Iranian win. But at the end of the day, I think we need to recognize that this is an evil regime. You mentioned arrests and the lack of due process. It's not just the lack of due process. If you're arrested, you're almost certainly tortured. And if you're any threat at all, at any level, to the regime, you're executed. This is a truly evil regime that we're dealing with. And we may be dealing with the second string or the third string, and we may say they're different than the first string, but not really. Not if they're guided by the same ideology, by the same motivations. That has always been characteristic of the Islamic Republic. And we need to internalize that. And we need to, in my view, do what we can to facilitate the Iranian people taking over the government. Regime change from within, not with U.S. boots on the ground. We're not going to be able to affect it even from the air. But we need to support the Iranian people in their struggle because they are struggling for freedom and democracy. And we see that around the world in terms of the Iranian presence. Now we need to see it in Iran itself.
Well, I do worry that and again, caveating this with everybody wants peace, but I do worry that if we cut a deal for expediency's sake, that we are closing the door on that hope and the ability to get the people again to be brave enough to rise up. Because as you pointed out earlier on, The security apparatus, they're still intact, and they still have the guns. Sir,
but we need to...
Joseph, I can't tell you how... I was just going to say, I really enjoyed this.
We need to forgo appeasement, because we know where appeasement leads. We've seen it over and over in the last century, and we've seen it in this century. We need to be true to our own ideals, and we need to be true to our national security interests.
Yeah. It's in today's political environment in the U.S., I'm not sure if that's a possibility. My God, you're going to say to yourself after you finish this interview, you're going to go, that was the most cynical person I've ever talked to. But I was about to say that's the most cynical young man, but then I looked at myself in the monitor. I thought I can't get away with that. Ambassador, this has been a delightful conversation, and I do hope you'll come back because we've got a lot of ground left to cover. But I just want to tell you how much I've enjoyed this talk.
I've enjoyed it as well, and I should say that I'm not known for my optimism either. So I'll look forward to a return visit.
Excellent, sir. Thank you very much. Ambassador Robert Joseph joining us here on the Situation Report. Take care. Great guy and tremendous experience, and certainly timely in terms of hearing from him right now while they're talking about cutting a deal. All right, well, after years of sanctions and war, wow, we're just going from one cheery topic to the next. New signs of strain are emerging inside Russia, from a slowing economy to growing frustration over government crackdowns. Now, we'll be joined by Konstantin Samoilov, a Russian expat. He's been here on the Situation Report before, and creator of @InsideRussia. You should check that out, to break down what's really happening inside the country. Stay with us. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, you may well know me as the host of the President's Daily Brief podcast. Hopefully you do know me as host of the PDB. But did you know I'm also a business owner, have been for years. And as a business owner, I never want to miss new revenue opportunities or miss out on potential new clients. And that's why I hate missed calls. Look, any business owner will tell you, missed calls can mean missed revenues. It's that simple. So I want to tell you about a great company out there helping you stay connected. And that's Quo, Q-U-O. Quo helps you and your team share one business number, reply faster, and stay on top of every customer conversation so you never miss an opportunity to connect. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Quo is the #1 rated business phone system built for how modern teams work. And get this, more than 90,000 businesses rely on Quo to stay connected, professional, and consistently reachable. It's easy. Calls, texts, voicemails, transcripts, and contact details all live in one clean view. Make this the season where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/PDB. Again, that's Quo, Q-U-O, quo.com/PDB. Quo, no missed calls, no missed opportunities. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Now, after more than 4 years of crushing sanctions and the most deadly war in Europe since World War II, the pressure inside Russia is starting to mount. Vladimir Putin, you've probably heard about him, publicly scolded top officials this week after the economy contracted by 1.8% in just the first 2 months of the year. And while economic growth has slowed dramatically, state control of information is tightening, with ongoing mobile internet blackouts now frustrating ordinary Russians and the elite as well, adding, of course, to the strain. Now, for more on this, I want to bring in Konstantin Samoilov, a Russian expat who left his country in the fall of 2022. Now, Konstantin's been on the Situation Report before, extremely connected, and the insight is, I thought, would be exceptional now because there's been so much focus on what's happening in Iran. It is easy to lose sight of this 4-year-plus conflict that's been going on. He now runs the popular YouTube channel @InsideRussia. I recommend you check that out regularly, where he offers commentary on the current situation within Russia. Konstantin, it's great to see you again, man.
Fantastic to be here. Thank you very much for inviting. Pleasure.
Of course. Well, let's kind of go from 30,000 feet. Let's take it from the top here. What's your assessment at this stage? We're kind of entering the spring, early summer fighting season, but what's your assessment of the conflict currently? Where does Russia stand from your perspective?
Russia is militarily, it's not in a very good situation. So we can divide it into parts: a military part, economy part, social and so forth. Would you like to talk about military? Where does it stand in Ukraine?
Yes, I mean let's break it down into all those areas, but let's start with the current battlefield realities. Right, we hear a lot of back and forth, but from your perspective and from your sources and contacts, how do you assess the Russians' military position currently?
Russian armed forces are falling apart. They are barely holding their positions right now. There are big troubles, and the biggest trouble is on the inside, corruption. They're losing more men than they recruit these days, and it's becoming a problem for Putin. He's getting involved in that. There's a huge corruption. That morale of fighters, of soldiers, officers is extremely low. And no one really understands what they're fighting for. They're not moving, they're not pushing into Ukraine, they're barely holding their positions. And Ukraine is getting upper hand on Russia in terms of military tech. It has become the drone war, and Ukraine is so much advanced. In 4 years, they have advanced, let's put it this way, one of the world leaders. I think in the future, Ukraine will have one of the mightiest armies because of its drone advancements. Now that's where Russia is standing right now. It's gotten so bad that Russian propaganda has stopped talking about army and its victories in Ukraine. They can't even sell it under any sauce anymore, so it's bad.
Now, I guess it's been 4+ years. What is I know this is a very sort of soft science question, but what is the mood of the Russian population? Because you would think after all this time, after all the casualties, after all the cost, that there would be some significant level of protest out on the streets from the people who are saying enough is enough.
The society has changed. Certainly has changed since we talked last time. I believe it was back in July. Russians have started noticing rapid changes in their lives, changes to the wars. When the war started, most of Russians built information bubbles around themselves. That's why I call them information bubbles. Because Mike, it really hurts when you start asking yourself questions and with answers obvious. My country is the invader, is the aggressor. My country is killing people in the neighboring country. What for? Once you start asking yourself these questions, the answers that you have, they hurt. I know, because I asked myself these questions on the day one, and I've been hurting ever since. So it's much easier to isolate yourself in a bubble, to say yourself, you know what, it's none of my business. This doesn't concern me. Yes, there's a war happening in Ukraine, it's far away. I don't really watch the news because they're disturbing, and I just mind my business. This is my life. I go and earn living, and this is my family. And once anyone asks me, like I did, I asked many Russians, I say, you know what, I stopped talking about that. I don't want to know. Example, I would call people I know in Russia, Moscow, Rostov, Novosibirsk, and I would start conversations, and they would say, we don't know anything about it. And when I offered to inform, because I know, like, they would shut me down immediately. Oh, no, it's too, you know what, we're going to go crazy if we learn these things. Well, guess what? They lasted in that situation inside their bubbles for 4 years. But, I mean, it's obvious that if they try to live there forever, they can't. The state came and started knocking on their bubbles from the outside, poking their bubbles, Right now, the harsh reality is that the living standard of absolute most Russians has dropped tremendously. And I've talked so much about that on my podcast, and I think we discussed it here, the economic situation in Russia. Very simple. Russia has been spending so much more than it's been earning, plain and simple. And for 4 years, it was spending the reserves, covering that deficit, that gap, with the reserves it had accumulated selling lots of oil in the previous 2 decades. So that money, that reserves, lasted for 4 years. And I call that period grand sugar coating. Because when you have money, when you pay everyone, when you, raise salaries, you can sell any kind of idea. Oh, we're winning in Ukraine. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the money is gone. I mean, it's gone. There's nothing. 11 provinces of Russia, the federal employees are not getting paid because there's no money to pay them. And Russia's printing press is red hot because they print so much money. But even still, it's not enough to pay federal employees' salaries. And the provinces of Russia have their own budgets. Now they are in deficit and red, and federal budget cannot bail them out. So they go to commercial banks and borrow at commercial rates to actually pay teachers, doctors, medical personnel, to keep on things running. Imagine how bad it's become. So Russia is collapsing economically, and it's making people's lives much worse. And then they are not happy. They start speaking up. They certainly share their opinions on social networks, and the state is striking back. The state is increasing oppression. That's what's happening right now. There's a huge war between the state and Russian population. That is waking up. No street protests. There were very few here and there, but then they were crushed. Certainly not thousands of people, but dozens of people in a few cities under different source. Some were protesting what is going on with Novosibirsk province. The cows are getting killed by tens of thousands, and some were protesting the pushback against internet. But no mass protests on the streets, but people are talking in the kitchens. And you know what? That could be a first step.
Could be the first step. I guess I'm glad you pointed out the internet shutdowns, the blackouts. We've been covering those here on the PDB and talking about sort of the increasing aggression of Moscow and closing down the internet for a variety of reasons. They say it's for national security concerns. They don't want the internet, to be, used by the Ukrainian military for drone attacks and so. But I guess setting all that aside, it's a simple thought, a simple question, but with all of that, how does Putin maintain his grip?
His grip, he's losing. He's losing power. He's sleeping. He has built a system of governing Russia that is called the vertical of power. The KGB blueprint. Okay, the system is very strong, and it lasted for so many years. But now it's cracking up. The cracks are visible. The biggest problem for Putin right now is that he's exhausted economic levers for his elites and for people. Okay, he used to flood everyone with money. He used to give oligarchs, his friends, and everyone in the top of the pyramid, financial resources. Large companies, natural resources to extract, and so forth. And that's how he kept them on the leash. And same thing with the siloviki, the power agencies that are armed and have right to use violence against Russian people. He used to flood them with money. Now the money is gone. He cannot feed them as much. At least the pie is shrinking. That's how I call it. And people are protesting more and more. They don't like what's happening to them. They don't understand what Russia is doing in Ukraine. It hasn't been explained in 4 years, not once. Okay, a lot of the crime is up. The crime rate is up. A lot of what in Russia they call veterans. I don't know how to call those people. Okay, who sold their souls and fought in Ukraine. Now they come back with weapons, and a lot of them are PTSD, and they're just driving the street crime up. Okay, there are gangs, 90s style, started appearing. In Rostov-on-Don, there's one gang in the place where I lived. Okay, people who I know from the reporting. So Russians don't like that. And obviously they want changes. Putin doesn't want changes. What can he do? He's exhausted the money option. Now he's using the oppression option. He is increasing oppression more and more. He's basically turning Russia into North Korea. It used to be a joke.
I mean, he's going back to his roots. Yeah, he's going back to his old KGB roots. Yeah,
exactly. He does what he knows best. That's how I describe it. And but in order to keep everyone under his rule, okay, keep the power, he needs to strengthen those who can make this happen. And there's one agency, that is KGB, FSB, okay? And Putin lasted for so long on top of the pyramid because he made sure to have a system of political checks and balances. Okay, just like Politburo was on top of, these three large agencies, the army, the KGB, and the federal police. Putin has done the same, only he has more players. He has different clans, oligarchs, groups, agencies, and he's been keeping everyone in balance. Now the KGB has become the most powerful agency in Russia. And this is the death of Putin. There's no question about that. So he was facing a dilemma.
Okay. I want to pick up on that point that you just made. I want to pick up on that point that you just made, Konstantin, when we come back. But first we need to take a quick break. We'll be back with more from Konstantin. Check out his YouTube channel. It's very interesting. It's at Inside Russia. But we'll be back with more from Konstantin Samoilov right here on the Situation Report. Stick around. Hey, Mike Baker here. Now, you may know that I am somewhat partial to the occasional martini, or two, hardly ever three. But I don't have any interest in feeling less than 100% the next morning. And that's why I love Z-Biotics Pre-Alcohol. Look, Z-Biotics is a genetically engineered probiotic created by PhD scientists to help prevent rough mornings after drinking. And who knows more about rough mornings after drinking than PhD scientists? Here's the thing. Alcohol creates a toxic byproduct in your gut. And Z-Biotics Pre-Alcohol produces an enzyme designed to break it down. Just make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, and you feel better tomorrow without sacrificing the fun. No rough mornings, no regrets or regrets, however you pronounce it, just an easier next day. From the fairways of Augusta, and once again, I'm going to say the same thing, congratulations to Rory for a great win, to the opening pitch of baseball season and festival weekends, April is packed with outdoor celebrations. So don't let the morning after keep you on the sidelines. Drink Z-Biotics Pre-Alcohol to stay ahead of the game and make the most of every sunny Saturday, or Sunday, or Friday, whatever floats your boat. Go to zbiotics.com/PDB and get 15% off your first order with code PDB at checkout. And get this, Z-Biotics also offers a 100% money-back guarantee. Welcome back to the PDB Situation Report. Now, joining me once again is Konstantin Samoilov. You can check out his commentary on his popular YouTube channel. That's at Inside Russia. Put that on your must-see list on a regular basis. Konstantin, thank you very much for sticking around. Is the FSB, used to be known as the KGB, is the FSB a threat now to Putin?
The biggest threat. Real danger. Well, Putin has used KGB to keep people at bay, to oppress the society. And the worst situation in the economy, in regular life, becomes for Russians, the angrier they become. And then the KGB needs more oppression. Well, I'm sorry, I still call FSB the KGB because it's basically the same agency, different names. So the more anger, the more dissent, the more power KGB needs to have. And Putin has been given more and more power. And that's the power of the KGB has been growing. And now it's at the point where the KGB is the biggest, strongest, most powerful agency in the entire Russia. It controls everything. Fresh news from Rostov-on-Don. The court system is under the KGB now. Prosecutor's office is under the KGB. Federal police completely under KGB. They rule, okay? There is not one single force that can stand up to the KGB. And I think at this point, Putin is at the point of no return. He's crossed the Rubicon, basically, okay? He's let the situation grow out of control. He does not control the system of this balance, political balance, system of checks and balances is gone, okay? KGB is too strong. And basically what's going to happen now is they either will put him under complete control, so he'll become a marionette, or something will happen to him. And he's going to be out of the office. I believe that the only way he's going to be out of the office is death. Something will happen. Well, all of a sudden, he's an old man. All of a sudden, heart stops beating. Okay, the heart failure.
Yeah.
And he will be immediately blamed for everything. I think the situation will repeat itself. And I mean, what happened in 1917 with Bolsheviks, Lenin. I mean, it's crazy. We're seeing the parallels with 1917. Vladimir Lenin signed first two executive orders, the Order of Peace and the Order of Land. Basically, he stole the land from the owners, and he gave all the lands that Russian Empire had gained from Germany in World War I back to Germany. And I think a very similar thing will happen. Okay, people will come out and say, hey, look, we are such and such, and we've been looking with awe what's been happening to Russian people, and they'll just give facts. Look how many people were killed in Ukraine, real numbers. Look, this is a real situation in the economy. Look, this is the real situation with the oppression, with the internet and all of that, and it's terrible. Right now, Russians are being lied to, and these people will come out with the truth. And I'll say, we know who's responsible. That guy, and we're going to change everything. And, that's how it's going to go.
Konstantin, you mentioned the people that have been lost to the Ukraine conflict. From your reviewing and all your contacts and all your sources, what's the most credible number when we talk about total number of casualties? I'm talking killed and injured, wounded, over the course of this entire conflict. Have you seen a number that you look at and you go, yeah, I believe that's credible on the Russian side?
Both killed and maimed, 1 million. I've seen the different numbers, different sources for such numbers. I believe around 1 million altogether.
Okay, all right, that's astounding, and
it's beyond
it kind of
astounding.
Points to
2026.
I mean, I was going
21st century.
Yeah, 21st century, and we're engaged in World War I style trench warfare in a number of those frontline areas. But it does show that that Moscow's strategy at the outset of this invasion, to recruit and to staff up the military with people from outside of the main urban centers, right? Try to keep this away from however you want to refer to them, the educated, the elite, whatever, those that may have the most influence on his political future. And so, you pull in all those people from the outer regions, and then at some point you start emptying the prisons, perhaps. But what is, and I am getting to a question here, Konstantin, do they still have this significant manpower advantage over Ukraine that we've talked about now for the course of this conflict?
It's really hard to say because we don't know real numbers. But I always look at the reality of what's going on. If they had such a great advantage over Ukrainians, and if they had somewhat efficient warfare tactics, hardware, they would be advancing into Ukraine. And they're not. They can't even take Kupiansk. Putin, it's been his goal to take that Ukrainian town, and he even announced himself in November that Kupiansk was under complete control. So it's a thing for him to get it. And I'm sure that all resources of the Russian armed forces are thrown to capture Kupiansk. And failure. We are in middle April right now, and Kupiansk is still not controlled by the Russians. I mean, that tells us what's going on at the front lines. Not good for Russia. Even if they have advantage in people, they use that advantage terribly. They can't. They're not moving anywhere. They're not advancing. I believe that their morale is very low, that the soldiers and officers, they have no clue why they are in Ukraine fighting Ukrainians. And therefore, they just, they're doing the very Russian thing. They steal money from each other, from the budget, from the state. They try to use the war to enrich themselves. That is a method to enrich themselves. That. I am absolutely sure of that. Okay, so they don't really care what's going on. Who wins if they advance in Ukraine. It's just their personal way of getting riches, and then buying apartments, cars after everything is over, or they are off the war.
Can Putin cut a deal that still allows him to stay in charge? In other words, has he gone so far down the road with this invasion that anything short of a significant victory will be perceived by both the FSB and others as a failure on Putin's part?
I think his last chance was when he flew to Alaska and the so-called peace summit. And if he made some kind of a deal then, he'd still be able to control Russia after the war. It would be over. Okay, so but no, at this point he cannot. When the war stops, he's out of the office dead. That's his death. Okay, he needs to continue this war to stay in power and to stay alive. So there will be no deal. They're trying very hard to get the rest of Donetsk province, and that's what he's been pushing in negotiating with the Americans and trying to Ukrainians to withdraw. Okay, and then giving some kind of guarantees, but that's the tiniest chance for him to show something, some kind of victory. Okay, you see, we got the Donetsk province. I mean, come on, at the cost of million lives of Russians, and I don't know how many Ukrainians were killed and died, at the cost of, razed cities in Ukraine, ruined economy in Russia, at cost of everything that is falling apart in Russia. I mean, that he's going to face very, very big questions in Russia if the war stops and he's still alive. So he's just he's interested in continuing the war for as long as he can, which not willing to.
What do you think will? What do you think will come from the upcoming elections? I mean, do they mean anything in today's political environment? In
Which ones?
Russia?
Russian elections or American?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Russian. No, I'm sorry, the Russian elections.
Oh, they don't mean anything. They're not really elections. They're circus. Nothing will come out. If everything is going the way it is now, okay, if the system is the same, the regime is the same, United Russia Party is still the biggest one in Russia, then comes September, nothing will change. The personalities will change, the names will change, but in terms of politics, because Russia doesn't have a competitive political system. There are no opposition parties, okay? That Russia is built solid into the vertical of power, and the political parties, they are part of the regime. They're part of this vertical of power, so nothing will change. None.
Is there any actual opposition? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Konstantin. I'm sorry.
Perhaps things will change before the elections. Perhaps Putin. August, I bet on August being a very hot month for Russia. Perhaps there will be a coup. Perhaps there will be a sudden death. Perhaps things will change. Then, who knows? The more fair elections might be held. I don't know. But if everything is going the way it's going, then, there'll be no difference.
Why do you think August?
Historically, I don't know. August brought big changes to Russia. Every year, August brings changes. Kursk, coup, default, these big milestones, Ukraine invading Russia, you name it. There are so many things happen. Yeah. Prigozhin dying, big milestones happen in the month of August. Russians, it's a good, probably there's an explanation behind that. Russians, the climate in Russia is very harsh. So Russians work all winter and they take vacations en masse in July and in August. And Moscow gets very quiet because a lot of people are on vacations somewhere far away. Okay, and it's easier to change things in August or in July when, everyone is out. The offices are empty. Everyone's on vacation.
Yeah. So Putin, for the month of August, should stay away from open windows. Then
the recent news, he just increased the number of air missile defense systems to 57 just a week ago from 30 plus. So he doesn't want to wait until August. I think he's very scared now. He's very aware of the situation getting out of control, so he's trying to defend himself more and more now.
Well, Konstantin, I'd love to keep this conversation going, but we are out of time officially, so I'm going to have to hope that you pick up the phone and agree to join us again in the future when we call you, because we'd love to have you back on, man.
I would love to come back. Thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you, and good luck. Konstantin Samoilov, make sure you check out his YouTube channel. That's at Inside Russia. So go check that out. Put that on your list of regular reads and listens. But we'll have him back on. It is fascinating to understand to a better degree what is happening in Russia after all these years of this brutal conflict, and Putin still maintaining his kung fu-like grip on power. Well, that is all the time we have for this week's PDB Situation Report. Look, if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have anything you want to throw at us, well, please do. Just reach out to us at pdb@thefirsttv.com. You know what happens every week. Carl, the mailman, drops off another sack of your postcards and letters and faxes and sometimes text message and emails, and we all gather around the table, including our interns, and they are an above-average bunch, and we choose the best ones, and then we put them into an episode that we call Ask Me Anything, which is fired up on the launch pad right about now. It's going to be hitting the airwaves So keep those cards and letters coming. Finally, to listen to this podcast ad-free, you can do that, and you can do it very simply. Just become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief by visiting pdbpremium.com. I'm Mike Baker, and until next time, you know the drill. Stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.